I did not play the first game of this series, but I've jumped in on the second one and just been swept off my feet. This is Ender, Magnolia, Bloom in the Mist. It is a Metroidvania, the sequel / follow-up to the previous game, Ender Lilies, which was a very well-received indie Metroidvania that came out, I think, like a few years ago. It is, I guess, by most standards, a pretty standard Metroidvania in that it's like you've got the interconnected levels, you go somewhere, you hit a barrier, you clearly don't have like the thing to overcome it, so you go explore and find the item or whatever and come back. I think the twist with this one is picture like all the typical power-ups and upgrades that you get in a Metroidvania, but instead of them just being like this upgrade that you get on your character, they are themselves their own characters.
Cool.
So this girl is basically like a young girl. She can't fight by herself, but she can heal all these androids. And the idea is that she's basically going around to all these bosses. Like all the boss fights are these androids that have been like corrupted. They've been driven to madness, and she heals them. And once you heal them, they join your team as one of those Metroidvania power-ups. So this guy, for example, this is kind of like quite early in the game, so it's not too much of a spoiler. But this dude becomes your parry. And every time you parry, this guy like comes out and he does this like massive swing. And on top of that, they're not just like a cosmetic thing. They each have their own sort of like side stories going on. So every time you rest at like a camp to like rest your health or whatever, they often have some sort of like a dialogue conversation with you. And as you accrue this big team of androids that's coming along with you on the journey, they have their own like little discussions with each other. And you're trying to resolve their own like little side stories as you go. Basically how it starts, because I didn't give you footage of how it starts, but she wakes up, this girl, and she has no memory. She doesn't know who she is, except for like a really faint memory of some lady saving her from something before she like crashes down. She wakes up and she's just like surrounded by debris and destruction everywhere. And she just wants to get to the top. And basically, as you're working your way up, you meet all these androids that have their own reasons for wanting to also follow you up there and discover who they are, because they also have very little memory. It is a really beautiful game on like all fronts. Visually, I was really impressed by it. It has this sort of like papercraft diorama aesthetic that it looked kind of weird in the trailers because they're all sort of like 2D anime sprites, but they're not animated like frame by frame. They're kind of like spline animated, which can kind of make it look cheap, I think, from the trailers. But when playing it, it just feels like exceptionally smooth to play. Like it's really difficult to describe when watching it, but it's just like one of the smoothest Metroidvanias I've played. So this character that she's like fighting with, it's like the first character you save, and she becomes your basic attack. And these robots, like just then I did like a slam down, and that's another robot that I've saved through these boss battles. That owl is like a character I met along the way. And each of them give you some sort of either combat ability or traversal ability. And all the combat abilities have like multiple variations that you can unlock as well to kind of like build into specific play styles. So it's kind of like a Souls-like in that way. You can build toward like melee, range, status effects.
The way that's playing out, because it was hard to picture it when you were describing how a character could come out and do a parry while you're still basically just controlling the one player. But I was like, I wonder if it's like Marvel vs. Capcom-y kind of like when you do a double team attack or whatever, like they zoom in off map and do it. And it's like, it totally is that. And like, that's the precedent for it that they've just made work beautifully, seamlessly.
It's like that item in Smash Bros. You know, the one where like it brings in a little buddy?
Yeah.
Don't remember, but yes, totally.
You know
fighting
about.
like something that ghosts your move.
Yeah.
It seems, and then also like, it's such a, now that I think about it, it's such a clever idea for creating a cast of characters that then, like, let's turn all your abilities into a character, and therefore collecting them doesn't just turn into, you have got double jump. It's like, you have now got a character that is added to your party, and as you mentioned, if there's some RPG, or not even RPG, if there's narrative structure tied to that, and getting to have your double jump talks to your heavy attack. I guess they're not called that, they have names, but...
It's genius to me, because a lot of Metroidvanias I've played have been pretty light on narrative, because... you don't have like regular characters that you're interacting with because it's so exploration heavy that you like meet someone and then you move on. Whereas here, these guys are following you the entire time.
You got to fall in love with that giant turtle in like 3 scenes.
Yeah, exactly. And then he's
that old hag with a bag that sells you stuff. You might find her a little later on, but she's 100%. Not with you for the adventure.
No, exactly. I don't know, Josh, if you could scroll a bit, there's like you'll see like a scene where everyone's sort of like huddled around the campfire, and they're like, oh, maybe just before that bit.
Yeah, it's like...
But it's genius to me because it also makes you excited for each like this, like basically when you're sitting down to rest, they'll just have this little conversation. How cool is this Parry dude? He's like this old disgruntled guy, and he's like smokes this little magic fueled cigarette. It's like sick as hell. You can like picture him with
You're right, Austin. Smoking is cool.
Finally.
The vibe. Like there is such an aura to this game. Like I love it.
I'd love if the characters took on their actual personas of their abilities a bit too seriously, and it's
Sure.
like, hey, wall dash here. You haven't been really being used in the last bit as much as Parry over there.
For sure. The other thing that fascinated me about this was like the world building is incredible. It really reminds me of like a From Software game in that like the main plot is quite, I'd say, like simple, but there's a lot of like mysteries, a lot of plot threads that are left unanswered, and it's up to you to go and find like lore notes and stuff to piece together exactly the state of the world. And I just found it so like...
I love a fucked up sad person just moaning in a
100%.
corner, and you're like, what is that about?
Exactly. And here it's like I'm typically skipping like a lot of lore notes in games. Like I'm just kind of like breezing through it.
Yeah.
Here, like every lore pickup, I'm like reading through because I want to understand like
that-
how this world came to be.
Is
Are
that
you gonna
something
Vardy
that...
video this?
You know what? I feel like I should
could.
because I'm like, man, I'm so invested in this world.
Is that from the start? Like, again, was that an aesthetic thing that you were like, I love what they've created here and it's mysterious? Because it's like, to want to get into lore of something is, it obviously has a mood about it that you're like, this isn't just generic fantasy or even dystopian mechanical, you know, there's a lot of things that you can just throw down into a video game world to make it feel, but it is derivative in that sense. Like, does this actually have a point where you were like, I'm feeling moody or attached to this world?
I think what it was just like the fact that you were thrown in basically knowing nothing.
Yep.
And just as you meet these characters, you just kind of become intrigued by how this world operates and why it's so fucked up.
Well, I guess if they have good explanations rather than, oh, I'm just here because I don't know either.
Pretty
and
much.
What a crazy world. But if they're actually
or if they
like,
over-explained why they're there and you've just kind of got the answers and you're like, all right, moving on.
Yeah.
Whereas here, like, just every new zone you push into, you learn a little bit more about the world. And it addresses, like, really quite heavy themes, actually. Like, there's a section where it's kind of, like, hinting on, touching on, like, human trafficking. And there's basically the whole concept of the game is that, like, it's not a spoiler, but, like, all these robots are run by magic, and the magic's kind of going a little haywire or whatever. And it's about, like, humans abusing that magic and just like doing anything they can to keep this magic running because it fuels their slaves basically, and they start, you know, doing more questionable things with the magic. They're like, what if we fuse humans with the robots? What if we fuse animals with the humans using this magic as well? And yeah, this game kind of like touches on all these quite heavy topics, and I just found that really intriguing.
Yeah, totally. It's bold for games to do that instead of just, as I said, going with the generic kind of like this. They came up with some cool mechanics, and it's like the rest comes second. Whereas like there's developers have thought about a narrative here that's quite thought out and developed and a bit messed up.
I thought it was going to be quite like a standard Metroidvania. I thought it was going to be good, and I was going to move on because like the Steam reviews is sitting at like 95%. I was like, well, what's this about? Because I'm watching the trailers, I'm like, it looks like quite a standard Metroidvania. But I think it is that like world building and the fact that those characters blend into your upgrades and stuff that really like elevates this to the point where I think this might be like my favorite Metroidvania of all time.
That's amazing.
Really?
Yeah, like, and I feel like you just don't get that.
What was your
from
favorite before this
watching
one?
it.
Because I need to know like your
It was
base level.
probably Ori Will of the Wisps.
Yep, okay.
I think. And actually Prince of Persia was kind of up there.
The one
So
from
good.
last year.
The one from last year.
Lost Round.
Lost Round?
Yeah.
So good.
I feel like it's really
incredible.
hard to do something different with a Metroidvania
For
these
sure.
days.
It's kind of like a solved formula at this point.
Yeah, exactly. They've got it right. So to kind of think of something really out of the box like this and pull it off really well
sure.
is, you know, of course.
And this is the first game where as soon as I rolled credits, I was like, all right, I'm buying the previous game. I need to see what this is all
Totally.
about.
I
And
have
the
nothing but
previous
good
game
things about it.
Yeah, the previous game was well reviewed as well, but I kind of like just missed it at the time.
Yeah.
And playing that, it's it's similar in a lot of ways. It's like the bosses become your power-ups. They're all each their own characters. But the first game has this sort of like dark fantasy Souls-like aesthetic, whereas this one is more like industrial,
steampunky.
sort of, yeah. And so even as someone who didn't play the first game, you can jump into this without having played it, and it's a whole new sort of like, it's in the same universe, same world, but different land.
That's cool. I think like we saw, because we're talking about it being a solved like formula, making a Metroidvania like this, but since From Software's success, I think that's been the biggest thing we've seen in all these 2D side scrolls is how do I, like Salt and Sanctuary, how do I make a Souls-like 2D side scroller?
Sure.
And maybe the first Ender Lilies was leaning a little bit too much into that.
Exactly. It was
and now they
very
found their own
soft.
identity, and that stands out now
Yeah.
as something apart from now the Metroidvania Souls-like.
Right.
It's a little more.
I think that's why I might have skipped it when I saw it, because I was like, well, this is clear. It's Metroidvania with a Souls-like. And I was like, that's the thing. Whereas this one kind of had like a unique spin. It was a bit like Nier Automata a bit.
I was
but-
gonna say it had that vibes, but
yeah.
Nine Souls. Did you play any of that?
I did not play Nine Souls, no, but I heard that was fantastic.
That should be
as
the
well.
next one, I think, that
Yeah.
you move on to,
Yeah,
because
for
that
sure.
got stellar reviews last year. I love this is the only game that would ruin the narrative with the New Game Plus. You start the game again, and all your characters are like, "Hi, we're still here."
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah.
There's no goals anymore. Yeah, incredible game.
Very cool.
Really beautiful. Easily, I think, my favorite Metroidvania now, just because it's so well rounded. It's so
Totally,
good in
yeah.
like basically every aspect.
I might have
so
to check that out.
cool.
You should.